Crime Doubles on BBC One with another case for the squad next Monday. Details coming up. And later tonight, more real-life rescues. Michael Burke's 999 after the news.
A police officer murdered.
We should stage a reconstruction. At last walk home.
A stalker at large.
We're talking about an obsessive.
A killer unearthed.
I found this under her fingernails.
The bullets ricocheted off the floor.
But the key to the case is closer to home.
Boyd, I've got a match.
It's not the dead that gets you in the end, it's the people they leave behind.
Waking the Dead.
That's it, that's him.
A new crime double starts Monday at 9 on BBC One. The truth will out.
And the New Radio Times contains features and previews on forthcoming BBC programmes, together with complete listings for all major television channels.
Experiment 3. Is your ring finger longer than your index finger? Could you have a male brain, even if you're a woman? Find out in Child of Our Time, tomorrow at 9 on BBC One.
This is BBC One in the North. Now, the news at 10 o'clock with Peter Sissons and Ian White.
Disdain and defiance as Milosevic faces his judges at last. Not giving an inch, the former president denounces the court as illegal. Sharon and Arafat accuse each other of murder as the truce fades. Protestors breach security at one of Britain's most sensitive spy bases. Henman's brilliant comeback to earn a place in the last 8.
And here in the north, the Home Secretary says a planned march by the National Front through Bradford can't go ahead. And the off-duty policeman who pulled a motorist out of a burning car is nominated for a Bravery Award.
Good evening. Slobodan Milosevic made history today as the first former head of state to stand in a war crimes court. And in a few minutes, bristling with drama, he treated it with contempt, refusing to recognize its legality or even to acknowledge the charges. The deposed Yugoslav president was handed over to the United Nations Tribunal last week, accused of crimes against humanity. From The Hague, our correspondent, Justin Webb.
7:30 this morning at the War Crimes Tribunal, an early start for Slobodan Milosevic on a day that would turn out to be one of the most dramatic in the history of international justice.
The prosecutor versus Slobodan Milosevic.
The former president did not need to turn up today. He chose to do so, and he came with a purpose. As the judges walked into court, the defendant was preparing to do battle under the watchful, almost bemused gaze of the chief prosecutor. Slobodan Milosevic and the British judge Richard May began their tussle with the issue of legal representation.
Mr. Milosevic, I see that you're not represented by counsel today, and you should consider carefully whether it's in your own best interests not to be represented. These proceedings will be long and complex, and you may wish to reconsider the position. Now, do you want some time to consider now whether you wish to be represented?
A gentle enough request met with a blunt response.
I consider this tribunal false tribunal and indictments false indictments. It is illegal being not appointed by UN General Assembly, so I have no need to appoint counsel to illegal organ.
But Judge May is not afraid of a fight. As a Labour parliamentary candidate, he once stood against Margaret Thatcher, and the polite, firm Englishman persisted.
Now, do you want to have the indictment read out or not?
That's your problem.
An extraordinary response, delivered in English for maximum effect. The two men by now locked in battle.
Mr. Milosevic, we treat your response as a failure to enter a plea, and we shall enter pleas of not guilty on each count on your behalf.
As I have said, the aim of this tribunal is to justify the crimes committed in Yugoslavia. That is why this is a false tribunal,
Mr.
an
Milosevic,
illegitimate one. I'm sorry, the microphone is not on.
Mr. Milosevic, this is not the time for speeches. As I've said, you will have a full opportunity in due course to defend yourself and to make your defense before the tribunal.
In the end, Judge May won the day. He used his right to cut off the defendant's microphone, but Milosevic did not look unhappy with his performance. He had stood alone and made his views clear, and he had one more parting shot, a glance at his watch.
15 minutes.
15 minutes, he remarks contemptuously, adding all that noise for 15 minutes. And with that, the defendant had his second high-speed car journey of the day, back to the remand centre, and the world was left pondering the opening shots in this legal battle.
This evening here at the tribunal, prosecutors are saying they're unfazed by the day's events. They're concentrating on this document, the indictment presented to the court today, and on the work that needs to be done to link former President Milosevic to these crimes. His cooperation is not needed for that task. Justin Webb, BBC News, The Hague.
Investigators say they have a wealth of evidence to support Slobodan Milosevic's prosecution, but experts say, as Justin Webb has just remarked, that the main difficulty will be to establish credible links between the former president and the massacres carried out by Serbian forces in Kosovo. Tonight there were calls for top-secret communications intercepted by British and American security services to be made available to the War Crimes Tribunal. Our special correspondent Ben Brown reports.
For these women, victims of ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, it was a moment to cherish today and a sight they never thought they'd see. Slobodan Milosevic in the dock. The women are all from Srebrenica, scene of perhaps the worst atrocity in Europe since World War II, where thousands of Muslims were slaughtered. Is there anyone on earth who believes he is innocent, she asks. Even if Slobodan Milosevic had 200 lives and gave them all away, says another woman, it would not compare to our tragedy. So far, Mr. Milosevic is only charged with war crimes in Kosovo, not Bosnia or Croatia, and proving he ordered any atrocities will not be easy. The Serbs destroyed many of their records before they left Kosovo. Key pieces of evidence, it's understood, are still missing. The Hague's chief prosecutor, Carla Del Ponte, needs American and British intelligence intercepts of phone conversations involving the then Yugoslav leader.
That's your problem.
Richard Holbrooke, the American diplomat who negotiated with Mr. Milosevic, watched his performance today and called on the West to hand over its secret data.
It's very important that any intelligence information available to the Western countries through covert methods, which might shed light on these issues, be made available to Del Ponte and her team.
Goering to be hanged.
Winston Churchill feared Nazis might use the Nuremberg war crimes trials as a platform for their propaganda, and Mr. Milosevic may yet do the same at The Hague. But according to this international lawyer, he would first have to recognize the court and then defend himself properly.
The problem for Milosevic is that he's in a cleft stick. If he wants to use this trial to embarrass NATO, and the potential is there, he's got to cooperate with the court. He's got to put together a legal team and appear and contest the charges.
And however this extraordinary trial plays out, there's no doubt that in the Balkans they will follow every twist and every turn of it. Ben Brown, BBC News.
And Justin Webb is in The Hague. Now, Justin, it looked as if he could have cut the tension in that courtroom with a knife.
It would have been interesting just to see him there. It would have been interesting even if he hadn't spoken after all these years, after all this effort. But he did speak, and he spoke so cogently and forcefully, it was electric.
What are observers there saying about the decision by the judge not to have the charges read out and by Milosevic not to be legally represented?
Let me deal with Milosevic first of all. They say that is a mistake, and they say it very plainly for this reason. They say it could mean the difference for him between eventually receiving a full life sentence, the rest of his natural life, and perhaps getting something less than that and eventually getting out. That is because he does not possess the necessary forensic skills to rebut pieces of evidence bit by bit. People who say that he has a chance of doing that say he is making a huge mistake and he should rethink very quickly. On the side of the court, there is a suggestion that although everyone feels the British judge did very well today, he possibly made an error when he decided against having the entire indictment read to Milosevic. That is because it is thought that Milosevic hasn't himself read the indictment, so at some stage later on he might be able to say, or a lawyer on his behalf, that he hadn't properly seen it at the beginning of the case. That is how careful this court is going to have to be if it is eventually to get a conviction.
Justin Webb, thank you. The fragile ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians looked close to collapse tonight after both sides accused each other of lacking the will for peace. Harsh words were exchanged after the body of a Jewish settler was found today in the West Bank, and 3 Palestinians were killed last weekend. From Jerusalem, our correspondent Jeremy Cook reports.
There's supposed to be a ceasefire, but for both sides it's been another day of death and grieving. This was the funeral of Yair Hassanai, a Jewish settler who was stabbed and shot to death in the fields near his West Bank home. The killing came less than 24 hours after another settler was gunned down as he stepped out of his car to buy groceries. The Jews who have chosen to make their homes in occupied Palestinian territory are paying a high price in this conflict, which defies all political and diplomatic efforts to bring things under control. The ongoing violence means Israel's Prime Minister faces growing pressure to abandon the ceasefire and to hit the Palestinians hard. Even his foreign minister, a veteran peace negotiator, talks of a deep crisis.
The situation is troubling. The ceasefire was not as yet completely established, and it's going through an extremely difficult period of time.
For the Palestinians too, the ceasefire has become a sham. Even during the truce, the Israelis have continued to send in their helicopter gunships to kill Palestinians they say are planning attacks and bombings. The Palestinians call it an assassination policy.
They assassinated more than 7 Palestinian people. The Israeli government took a very dangerous decision to escalate the aggressive attacks against the Palestinians and to escalate the assassination policy.
And so with every death, attitudes are hardening still further. What's needed is compromise, a commodity which is in desperately short supply. Tonight then, the prospects for the ceasefire are bleak. Neither side wants to say that the deal is off, but the violence on the ground speaks for itself. The Americans are involved in increasingly desperate diplomatic activity, trying to urge both sides to show restraint. But few people in this region believe they have any chance of success. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Here, police in North Yorkshire are still trying tonight to remove a number of Greenpeace protesters from a military radar station near Harrogate. More than 100 activists entered the site this morning, demanding that the United States be banned from using it as part of its so-called Son of Star Wars missile defence system.
Dwarfed by the hardware of Menwith Hill, the intruders who took their campaign to the heart of this top-secret installation. They'd struck at 5 a.m, moving in from 3 directions and catching the base security unawares. Stop. Filmed by their own video teams, protesters forced their way through the front gate. There were scuffles as MOD police tried to prevent them fanning across the site. Along the fence line, other groups had constructed ladders to cross the razor wire, dodging police reinforcements who moved to cut them off. Around 40 made it to pre-selected vantage points where they were guaranteed the attention they sought.
There are already constructions going on. There are a couple of new golf balls that have gone up that will house the eyes and ears of the Star Wars system. And we're opposing Star Wars because it will be extremely dangerous and destabilising.
The giant domes around Menwith Hill's satellite dishes have attracted protests before. This one had been planned for 6 months and coincides with Independence Day celebrations among the American workforce. Some of the unwelcome visitors had chained themselves to the top of an 80-foot-high water tower. One by one, they were cut free by police climbers and taken down the narrow ladders. In achieving its aim, today's action has raised concerns over the levels of security at this most sensitive site. Greenpeace have now warned that security elsewhere may be tested in the coming months as their campaign to raise public awareness over the Star Wars issue gains momentum. Robert Hall, BBC News, North Yorkshire.
The Conservative leadership contender Ian Duncan-Smith said today he was opposed to the euro in principle, and he challenged other candidates to make their positions clear too. His rival, David Davis, also on the right wing of the party, said the Tories needed to adopt fundamental solutions to modern problems.
Chris Sweetland. Tony Horton. Patrick, how do you do?
The Tory party may be down, but at least it still knows how to throw a decent lunch. At the grandest of the Conservative leadership hustings so far in London's Savoy Hotel, Ian Duncan-Smith, who many on the right see as the best hope of stopping both Michael Portillo and Kenneth Clarke, swore his undying opposition to the euro.
The Conservative Party, led by me, would be settled on the issue of Europe. It should be no surprise to anyone that I am opposed to entry into the euro on principle.
A rather tepid response to that. But Mr. Duncan-Smith, a former Hague loyalist, regards clarity on Europe as essential for a true leader. He was trying to use this business-dominated audience to goad his rivals into being equally frank.
So I believe that it is therefore incumbent on every candidate now to make clear their position on this issue so that we can engage in the widest debate about the future direction of the Conservative Party.
We've got to come across as energetic. We've got to be, look like we're serious about it.
A less glamorous setting for David Davis, the other right-wing challenger, a former Europe minister and a leading Commons inquisitor, challenging the government over schools, health and other public services.
It's now in the public domain that 5,000 people a year die in hospitals from diseases they didn't have when they went in. Remember that? Yes. That was one of my studies, you see,
No one yet sees Mr. Davis as a front runner in this contest, but he's done himself a lot of good in the last 2 weeks.
What I'd like to see is my party picking up this notion of modern conservatism, applying fundamental conservative principles that have worked for centuries to modern problems. Health, education, law and order, all the things that people care about.
So, who's going to win? Well, there are 350,000 Conservative activists with a vote, and of those, perhaps 200,000 are entirely unknown to Tory MPs, officials, and of course the media too. No one knows what they're really thinking. So anyone who says today they know the winner of this contest is either a fool or a liar. Andrew Marr, BBC News outside Conservative Central Office.
143 people are reported tonight to have been killed in a Russian aircraft that crashed in Siberia. The plane came down close to the city of Irkutsk en route to Vladivostok. No survivors have been found. Our correspondent Robert Parsons is in Moscow. Robert, what more can you tell us?
Well, what we know is that the plane was Tupolev 154 was coming into land to refuel at Irkutsk on its way to Vladivostok. It fell short something like 15 miles from the city into an area which is very heavily populated by holiday homes. It's near Lake Baikal, very popular with holiday makers in this country. It came down in forested area. Apparently it didn't hit any of the houses, but all those on board were killed. And according to reports that we're getting from the area, villagers say they saw the plane coming down, making 3 circles around before it finally spiraled into the ground. And at this stage it seems they're suggesting that it may have been heavy cloud cover that was the cause of the crash, although the emergency ministry here is saying they can't be certain until they've seen the black box. But at this stage it looks like weather may have been the cause of the accident.
Robert Parsons in Moscow, thank you. The European Commission has blocked the merger of 2 of America's biggest companies. General Electric planned to acquire Honeywell International in a £30 billion deal, but the Commission said the combined company would dominate the aerospace market, leading to higher prices. It's the first time a US merger has been stopped solely by European regulators. 1 person was killed this morning when fire engulfed the 9th floor of a tower block at Ramsgate in Kent. 26 people were rescued by firefighters and the crew of an RAF helicopter. A body was found later inside the building. Police are still trying to establish its identity. It's reported tonight that Spanish coach drivers whose industrial action delayed dozens of holiday flights have settled their pay dispute and abandoned plans for further strikes. Thousands of tourists flying in and out of Mallorca, Menorca and Ibiza suffered long delays at the weekend. Fears are growing for the safety of an 11-year-old girl who's gone missing on a school trip to northern France. Bumi Shagaya hasn't been seen since she went swimming in a lake near Dieppe with her classmates yesterday afternoon. Staff at Bumi's South London primary school have denied that there wasn't enough adult supervision.
The Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Greenwich is exactly what the government has in mind when it urges private money to back public projects. Funded by outside investors, its support services, such as cooking and cleaning, are managed by a commercial company that is paid by the NHS for this work.
The private sector people running cleaning and catering, that's their expertise. And what it's doing is channeling that expertise in the appropriate direction and allowing the NHS to channel its clinical expertise and focus on patients.
The Prime Minister came to this hospital during the election campaign.
Well, I'm sorry, we were running the wrong report there. Let me take you on to the fears about the safety of 11-year-old Bumi Shagaya, and we'll try and run that report.
This popular lake is now the centre of a massive search for 11-year-old Bumi Shagaya. She was among a group of 41 children from Hillmead Primary School in Lambeth, South London. It was the first time the school had organised a trip abroad for its pupils. They went swimming yesterday afternoon, but it was only after a routine head count that the 6 parents and teachers realised that Bumi was missing. French police have given out her passport photo in the hope that she may have just wandered off. At her school, there is great anxiety.
Bumi is a very intelligent, a very friendly, and a child that is well liked across the school.
This is every parent's worst nightmare, but the local education authority insists that supervision arrangements for the trip had been carefully organised.
We believe at this moment in time that all necessary precautions had been taken. Clearly we will have to look into the whole matter to see what arrangements have been made, what exactly happened.
The children and teachers are now back at their hotel here in Dieppe, but at the lakeside the search will continue through the night. Though the longer it goes on, says the gendarme leading the inquiry, so hope diminishes. John Sopel, BBC News, Dieppe.
Now back to the report we inadvertently began a few moments ago. The British Medical Association is holding its annual conference in Bournemouth against a background of criticism of Labour's plans to involve the private sector in the NHS. The plans have been attacked not just by doctors, but by union leaders and some Labour MPs. But there are questions too from the business world, which would provide the private money wanted by the government for investment in the NHS. Our business editor, Jeff Randall, reports.
The Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Greenwich is exactly what the government has in mind when it urges private money to back public projects. Funded by outside investors, its support services, such as cooking and cleaning, are managed by a commercial company that is paid by the NHS for this work.
The private sector people running cleaning and catering, that's their expertise. And what it's doing is channeling that expertise in the appropriate direction and allowing the NHS to channel its clinical expertise and focus on patients.
The Prime Minister came to this hospital during the election campaign to demonstrate his support for private-public initiatives. They are increasingly important for the NHS, which struggles to make ends meet even with a budget of £60 billion. But if private-public schemes are to flourish, ministers need to maintain the confidence of profit-driven investors whose payback is often spread over 20 years or more. David Mehta, the man whose company financed the Queen Elizabeth, insists that these projects are not about charity.
It would be very unusual to purchase anything from the private sector where the private sector wasn't seeking to make a profit. So involving the private sector means being comfortable with the notion that the private sector will make profit.
Here in Reading, people can walk into this private health clinic and buy a wide range of services, including advice from a GP, physiotherapy, and even laser eye surgery. It's owned by a fast-growing company that's quoted on the stock market. But its founder is concerned that there's confusion over what government expects from business and what it's offering in return.
there is no clarity in the marketplace at the moment about what this partnership really means. What good is it for the patient, for the private provider, and for the NHS? But I do believe that the government should consider some incentives.
Government wants to make the health service better by bringing in resources from private enterprise. But many in business remain suspicious about dealing with Whitehall, where paperwork rather than profit drives the system. If public-private finance is to work for health, then more companies need to be told precisely what's in it for them. Jeff Randall, BBC News, Reading.
Now today's tennis, and over to Wimbledon with a roundup of all the day's action from Mary Rhodes.
Thank you, Peter. Well, it was a different Tim Henman who stepped onto centre court today. The number 6 seed resumed his match 2-1 down against Todd Martin, but the British number 1 rallied to earn a place in the quarter-finals.
It's difficult to judge who suffers most at Wimbledon, Tim Henman or his supporters. Thousands who couldn't get seats for his resumed fourth-round match against Todd Martin saw on the giant screen that his back problems had disappeared. The first point was his statement of intent. From then on, he dominated. The grey around Todd Martin's temples now told of age, not wily experience. Henman took the fourth set 6-3 to level the match. Now the momentum was his and the tempo was unrelenting. Martin was about to pay for daring to pull the plug on Henmania on the same court 5 years ago. By now limping in the prelude to defeat, Martin was dispatched with a ruthless efficiency not often associated with the British number 1.
When you're 2-1 down, obviously you've got to get things going pretty quickly. So I knew I had to come out and try and get a quick start, and I did that. Just pleased to get through.
The question now, with Sampras out of the way, how far can he go with frailties which still remain? Kevin Geary, BBC News, Wimbledon.
Well, Jennifer Capriati is still on course for the Grand Slam. While one young Belgian faltered, the other is through to the semi-finals, and there were mixed fortunes for the Williams sisters.
With both daughters out on the show courts, it was divided loyalties for Mr. Williams. First, he watched Serena win the opening set of her game against Jennifer Capriati. It was a match marked by injury breaks for both players, but the interruption seemed to strengthen Capriati's game. After being a set down and 2 points away from defeat, she turned it round, winning 9 games in a row, and now faces the Belgian player Justine Henin.
It makes it that much sweeter to actually come back and win a match like that. And I mean, it just proves, like, for the next time, that even if you're down and you're about to lose, I mean, you just never say die.
No such problems for Venus Williams against Natalie Tozier. The elder sister won a tight first set and then made easy work of the second. She's now up against Lindsay Davenport. The number 3 seed had a surprisingly straightforward win over the French Open finalist Kim Clijsters. Daniela Ralph, BBC News, Wimbledon.
And tomorrow Tim Henman is back for his quarter-final against Roger Federer. Peter.
Thank you, Mary. Well, it's nearly 27 minutes past 10. I'll be back a little later with an update on the day's headlines. But now we join our news teams across the UK.
Hello, good evening and welcome to Look North. I'm Ian White. A proposed march by the National Front through the streets of Bradford has been banned by the Home Secretary tonight. The far-right group wanted to march through the city on Saturday, but it was opposed by West Yorkshire Police and Bradford Council. Our reporter Sanjeev Patu has been following the story. He joins me now from our newsroom. Sanjeev, what has David Blunkett ruled tonight?
Ian, the Home Secretary has ruled that from midnight this evening there'll be no marches allowed in Bradford for a period of 3 calendar months. This is aimed at stopping the Anti-Nazi League and the National Front, the BNP, any group in particular from marching. He doesn't want any marches to happen in Bradford.
What have been the main concerns? Why was the application opposed so strongly?
Well, many different groups in the area felt that they didn't want the National Front to come into Bradford. They were last here in the 1970s. They felt their presence would be divisive. They would stir up racial hatred. They said the city was doing fine on its own and there was no racial problems, and by allowing a group like this to march in the city would cause immense problems.
So fears that there may be a repeat of the scenes we've already seen in Burnley and Oldham?
That's correct, yes, and there were rumours floating around the last 3-4 days, particularly at the mailer over the weekend in Bradford, that the National Front were actually planning to march in the heart of Manningham, which is obviously in the Asian community in Bradford, and that was the main worry for people.
So finally, very quickly, a sense of relief in the city tonight?
Yes, there is a sense of relief. People have been telling the council and the police that they didn't want the National Front, and obviously the Home Secretary has agreed with everybody.
OK, Sanjeev Patu, thank you very much. Motorists heading home through the north of Sheffield endured massive disruption after a huge gas leak closed Penistone Road in the Neeps End area of the city. A gas pipeline was fractured by contractors working for Yorkshire Water close to Hillfoot Bridge. The gas could be heard leaking from hundreds of metres away. Some buildings were evacuated and police were forced to close the A61 and set up diversions. The road reopened at 5:30. Asylum seekers in Hull staged a demonstration in the city to raise awareness of their plight. They say few people understand why refugees are here, and they're often greeted with hostility and abuse. The protesters are also seeking support for their campaign against the Home Office, which wants to return many of them to Iraq. Now, as you may have seen earlier, protesters have broken into a spy base in North Yorkshire. Members of Greenpeace scaled the fences and occupied areas of the base, including a water tower. Some arrests have been made. Well, over now to our reporter outside the base, Paul Murphy. Paul, what's going on there now?
Well, within the last minute, Ian, I've just heard that one of the protesters has broken away from the police and climbed up a 100-feet mast and attempted to chain himself there. So there's still plenty going on here. You can see the water tower you referred to in the background here. You can just pick it out in the gloom there. That's now been cleared of protesters. But across the base, across this huge base, there is still about 17 or 18 protesters on a flat roof near to one of the giant golf balls which so characterise this installation. The fire service has now been brought in an attempt to remove them, but the MOD seems to be taking its time.
So obviously the situation is changing hour by hour. Just remind us what happened earlier in the day.
Well, this began about 5 o'clock this morning. It was a three-pronged attack by about 100 protesters who entered the base through 3 different entrances and really gave the security here at the base very little chance. It was quite embarrassing for the security forces here. They've been here all day. The removal of the first of them began at about 5 o'clock this evening from the water tower behind me. But as I say, 17 are still sticking it out.
Finally, Paul, realistically, is there any sign of this coming to an end overnight?
Well, for the protesters, the critical day is tomorrow, Independence Day. They're trying to time their protest to coincide with many of the Star Wars protests that are taking place in the States. Star Wars, of course, is the weapons program with which this base is becoming increasingly closely associated with. The MOD, for its part, isn't in any hurry to get protesters off these buildings because clearly this is quite a hazardous site and they want to bring this to a peaceful conclusion without causing any unnecessary injury to any party.
OK, Paul, thanks very much indeed. A microlight pilot was taken to hospital after his plane struck power cables and crashed. The man, who's not been named, was attempting to land at Rufford Airfield near York this afternoon. Firefighters cut the man free and he was taken to York District Hospital suffering back and neck injuries. Bus passengers in northeast Lincolnshire could be left stranded after drivers voted for strike action. Drivers working for Stagecoach have lodged a 7% pay claim with the company. At a meeting in Grimsby today, they voted for an overtime ban and a series of one-day strikes in support of their claim. Well, now cricket and Derbyshire have been staging a day-night game at the county ground this evening against Worcestershire, and it was the visitors who took the spoils. Worcestershire made a commanding 288 for 6 from their 45 overs, but in reply Derbyshire struggled to 150 all out, losing by 138 runs. And meanwhile, one of Nottinghamshire's rising stars has been called up by England because of an injury to Yorkshire's Michael Vaughan. Usman Afzal has been added to the squad, which will face Australia in the first Ashes test at Edgbaston starting on Thursday. A police officer who carried out a dramatic rescue has been nominated for a Top Bravery Award. Sergeant Andy Hickenbottom from Lincolnshire was off duty when he came across this road crash. One driver died in a burning car, but thanks to Andy, Les Todd survived.
Well, I was just doing my job at the time. I'm a bit humble about it, really. I'm a product of training, so I don't feel brave at all. I don't think somebody standing next to you would agree with that.
He's a grand lad. I'd have been probably burnt to death.
And a look at the weather to end with. Remaining dry with broken cloud overnight. Very warm and humid again, I'm afraid. A minimum temperature of 16 Celsius. Tomorrow continuing dry, some cloud at first, but sunny periods developing with a top temperature of 26 Celsius. Peter Sissons has the main news again from the Look North team. Until tomorrow, good night.
And the main news tonight, Slobodan Milosevic has appeared before the International War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague. The former Yugoslav president refused to enter a plea and denounced the court as illegal. From the 10 o'clock news, good night.
Good evening to you. We have another steamy night to come, but it won't be just the heat that keeps us awake tonight. The thunderstorms may well as well. We can see a whole bunch of thunderstorms that have developed over the last few hours through the southwest of England into Wales and now moving into the northwest of England and southern parts of Scotland. They also bring the pitter-patter of rain, and some of that rain has turned out to be quite heavy. Good news for gardeners, but in general, I think if you're travelling on some of the roads, it could be quite unpleasant with some heavy bursts of rain, particularly heavy across parts of Wales over the last few hours. And some of that rain is now gradually spilling its way northwards into the Isle of Man, into the northwest of England, into Cumbria, into Lancashire, and up into southern parts of Scotland at the same time. So we have a warning for you about the intensity of that rain, especially heavy for Wales and the southwest of England over the next few hours. Possibility of some local flooding and also some quite dangerous driving conditions. The rain continuing for the rest of the night for many of those western areas, some of it getting into Northern Ireland and Scotland at the same time. But for eastern England and the Midlands, it should be a largely fine, dry night, and another very warm one indeed, with inner city temperatures not falling much below 16 to 19 degrees. Now things are set to change. We cut off the source of that very warm air, and as this low pressure system moves gently across into northern France, we change the air direction. It comes in from the east or the northeast, and that means the temperatures will drop quite significantly. And for those that really have suffered over the last few days, a drop in temperature will be welcome, especially come the end of the weekend as that cooler air moves through. Of course, the sunshine and the high temperatures have added to problems, but also we have a high air pollution problem at the moment, and the pollution index for England and Wales is up at 6 or 7 on a scale of 1 to 10. That is high, but hopefully the showers over the next few days will improve the air quality. The forecast then for Wednesday brings some more rain across parts of western Scotland into Northern Ireland. A few showers coming and going for southwestern England and Wales, and here those showers by the middle part of the afternoon could again turn out to be heavy and thundery, and also with an easterly breeze, a little bit of low cloud and mistness down that North Sea coast. But it will be another hot day, 29 or 30 the top temperature for those areas that keep the sunshine. Thursday's forecast brings a little bit cooler air, but also the risk of those showers coming somewhat further north, as well as rather cloudy conditions across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. And one or two of those showers could turn up for the cricket, of course, on Thursday, England v Australia, Edgbaston. You can follow that on Radio 4 long wave. Come Friday, those showers will move somewhat further north, but for much of the northern half of the country, dry.
Goff fired up, charging in, arms and legs pumping like a steam train. War looking safe as the Bank of England, really.
Oh, that went like a bullet through extra cover.
And he's burned up ground to get to that. Magnificent catch.
Of an absolute blunder. He miffed it and muffed it and missed it. One has to say it.
You put it very nicely, Burrs.
Full coverage of the Ashes on Test Match Special, BBC Radio 4, 198 Longwave.
Daily lives with hopes and dreams. BBC One's In Paddington Green in 40 minutes.
Tonight on 999, father and son stranded in Arctic conditions.
If they'd have stayed on the hill any longer, I'm pretty sure they would have perished.
Desperate attempts to rescue a mother dangling from a Ferris wheel. And attacked by more than 400 wasps.
You don't expect to die from wasp stings, do you?
The Cairngorm Mountains in Scotland are spectacularly beautiful, but they can also be deadly dangerous. On average, 35 people a year die in the Scottish mountains.
Scottish mountain conditions are bizarre. The winter Cairngorms are pretty much like an Arctic environment. It can be beautiful blue skies, and then very shortly after it can be horrendous weather. Our weather patterns change very quickly here because we're in a maritime environment.
Well, I've been coming up here for a few years now, probably 12 years or more. I've also been across to Arctic Sweden, Arctic Norway, try to photograph wildlife and see the mountains in the raw. And I thought it was time for our Dave to come and have a look.
Very apprehensive to see the place, you know, with my own eyes, and you know, I was ready for getting stuck in, really.
We left a map with the 6-figure grid references to every position that we would be at the end of each day.
John and Dave